we're supposed to be there. As if we belong. From time to time, those dreams were realized as we stepped foot on ground we weren't sure if we were going to get to. But by the time we get there, we usually have so much planned that we're not able to comprehend everything that's there. We have our pictures, our memories of an amazing place, and we've added a check mark to our bucket list. But we soon hear an internal buzz as the alarm clock of reality wakes us from our dreams and we return to our day-to-day lives. Mount Rushmore was one of those places for me. And it may be for some of you as well. And now, we're here. But most visitors to Mount Rushmore are only here for a very short time. They walk up, look at the faces, snap a few pictures, and it's back to the flags out to the parking garage and off to the next destination. And in our rush to add a check mark, it's so easy to miss the meaning of the place. Here, you can't miss the massive sculpture on the side of the mountain. But do you know why it's here? And do you know what it all means? Tonight, when the lights come on, not only will they reveal why these four presidents stand as a great emblem to this country, they're going to show us so much more than that. If you look close, you'll actually be able to see that there are many faces represented on the side of Mount Rushmore. Four presidents are clear: Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. But knowing that they represent a specific stage in our history will lead us to a deeper perspective and allow us to understand that it is the birth, the growth, the development, and the preservation of the United States and of this memorial that will allow us to see all of the faces. In 1927, not far from where we are now, President Calvin Coolidge stood at the dedication to Mount Rushmore. And he said, "It is natural that such a design begin with George Washington. For with him begins that which is truly characteristic of America. He represents our independence, our Constitution, our liberty. And as our first president, he represents the birth of this nation. The birth of concepts never before seen in this world. The birth of self-government. Concepts accentuated by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence as he detailed equality and the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he continued that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." But it was in 1803 when he brought these rights to lands they had never reached, with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, that Jefferson represents the growth of our country. And moving beyond those political and ideological freedoms espoused by Washington and Jefferson came the economic freedoms pushed by Theodore Roosevelt. His trust-busting broke up large companies, further developing the middle class in our country. His signature on the Antiquities Act authorized millions of acres to be added to our public lands. But he didn't operate just within our borders. He brokered peace between the Russians and the Japanese and became the first American awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He oversaw the development of the Panama Canal and truly built the United States into a recognized international power. But it was in a letter to one of his friends that Roosevelt said that this next president was his great hero. Abraham Lincoln had strong sentiments against slavery. And he said, "Whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." And it was because of these sentiments that he began his presidency under the most difficult circumstances of any president in our history. With the secession of the southern states, and ultimately the Civil War, Lincoln knew that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and he sought to preserve our youth. As we look at the faces of these men, we can see clearly that they represent this nation's birth, growth, development, and preservation. And it's difficult, if not impossible, to imagine the birth of this country without George Washington. Likewise, you can't imagine the birth of Mount Rushmore without South Dakota State historian Joan Robinson. Robinson had been trying to find a way to bring more visitors to the state, and after reading of a massive sculpture taking place in Atlanta, Georgia, he envisioned carving Western heroes such as Chief Red Cloud, Lewis and Clark, Buffalo Bill Cody, and others on the needles in Custer State Park. But he had to find a sculptor that was capable of such a monumental task, and he soon reached out to Gutzon Borglum. Borglum liked the idea, but he soon realized that those needles were too weathered and too worn and not capable of being carved. Not only did he find a location that would work here at Mount Rushmore, but he grew Robinson's vision beyond anything he had ever imagined. He saw that those Western heroes were too regional, and he felt that this needed to be something that was national in nature, something that would resonate with the American people, something that would inspire them with the story of their past that he could tell through these four presidents. And while Gutzon Borglum believed very strongly in his ability to manage every facet of this project, its development came down to some very specific people. People like Senator Peter Norbeck, who staunchly supported Mount Rushmore for the remaining days of his life. And that his first proposal sent a wire to then Governor Carl Gunderson that this is an opportunity we should not miss. Likewise in the House was Representative William Williamson, who pushed the legislation that ultimately authorized Mount Rushmore. Local Rapid City businessman John Boland kept the creditors at bay when funds were low and prevented the project from racking up bills when there was no money. And then there were the 400 workers. They weren't experienced mountain carvers. Work wasn't always consistent. But without them, this mountain would have never developed into the memorial that stands behind me now. As we've taken a thoughtful look at this mountain, we can see the faces of those who represent its birth, its growth, and its development. But as years go by, there is truly a need for preservation. Ropes and harnesses bring modern-day preservation into light, and from time to time we can literally see those workers out on the faces of the mountain. But preservation starts here, with each and every single one of us that are here tonight. We're etched into the heart of that mountain, and we represent the undying preservation that began at the birth of this nation. When those lights come on, look close, and you'll see your face on Mount Rushmore. Thank you.
The United States of America. It's hard to imagine, but not long ago, this great land of ours was pure wilderness. A place where millions of bison roamed freely throughout the plains. And those who lived off the land revered it as sacred ground. Yet this country would face a dramatic change, quickly becoming the most advanced nation in the world, in technology, in peace, and in power. From its inception, the United States has shaped itself under the guidance of strong leaders. Leaders who have taken risks, stood up to adversity, and never let go of their vision for a better country. Mount Rushmore reminds us of them, and the countless Americans who have made great sacrifices to ensure the lasting legacy of our country. Freedom. We strived for it. We died for it. We live for it. The year was 1923. The place, the Black Hills of South Dakota. State historian Doane Robinson proposed that these granite outcroppings could be the site of an enormous monument dedicated to the heroes of the West, such as Lewis and Clark and Chief Red Cloud. But commissioned sculptor Gutzon Borglum had a different concept in mind. Borglum was a passionately patriotic man, and believed that a more fitting tribute should honor the American experience. A memorial that would represent our ideals, our dreams, and our accomplishments as a country. A memorial that would convey a spirit of patriotism. Borglum chose his canvas carefully. The giant granite rock face of Mount Rushmore. And in 1927, work on the mountain began. Borglum assembled a team of local miners, ranchers, and lumbermen to help with construction. The sculptor built a model of the presidents to serve as a guide. Every inch on the model represented 1 foot on the mountain. Year after year, Borglum and his crew hung perilously off the side of the mountain, drilling and blasting their way to reach granite solid enough for carving. It took 14 years and nearly $1 million to complete the 4 60-foot faces. And even though the sculptor did not live to see the very final touches put into place, he was able to carry out his vision. 4 great Americans immortalized in stone, symbolizing the democratic society in which we live, the struggle for our independence, the fight for our freedom, and the sacrifices we have made since our country began more than 200 years ago. It was a time of rebellion and of war. It began as an uprising against British rule and turned into a full-fledged crusade for personal freedom and national independence. The American Revolution. From 1775 to 1783, up to 250,000 patriots engaged in battle. Even during the toughest times, when the Continental Army seemed undisciplined and ill-equipped, one man's courage and determination ultimately led the troops to victory over the British. The future father of our country, George Washington. Born and raised in colonial Virginia, George Washington grew up to be a firm believer in American independence. Even though his heart yearned for quiet family life at his Mount Vernon home, his deep commitment to the Republic made him answer the call of his country time and time again. As general, Washington became an instant hero throughout the colonies. The public was so enamored with him that many people wished that he become king. But Washington scoffed at such an idea.
The army must serve the country, but not rule it. Express your utmost horror and detestation of the man who wishes to overturn the liberties of our country. George Washington, 1783.
It was this kind of insight and integrity that made him the perfect person to oversee the creation of a new federal government. With no blueprint to follow, Washington kept the colonies united and on course during the infant years of this nation. And after ratification of the Constitution, when he was unanimously elected first President of the United States, Washington was keenly aware that he was laying down the framework for future presidents to follow. Washington's legacy is that of a man who was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. In his inaugural address, he spoke of the task that lay before this new nation.
The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally staked, on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. George Washington, 1789.
George Washington welded this union, but it would take another great visionary to expand it. Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, 1776.
Thomas Jefferson was the voice of the American people, inspiring patriots with his carefully crafted words written in the Declaration of Independence, the document that gave birth to our nation. It was also Jefferson who fought for religious freedom and the democratic notion that people should have a say in government, two very American principles we cherish today. Thomas Jefferson always thought of himself more as a scientist or scholar than as a politician. And it was this quest for knowledge that played a role in the greatest achievement of his presidency. In 1803, Jefferson acquired the French lands west of the Mississippi and the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the country. In an effort to find out what America now owned, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on their famous expedition out west. It was an exciting time of discovery for new Americans. However, what was good for a growing nation was not necessarily good for its original inhabitants. During this time of expansion, many Native Americans were uprooted from their homes and hunting grounds and pushed farther west. But during an address to a group of Cherokee chiefs, Jefferson prophesied about future relations between natives and new settlers.
I shall rejoice to see the day when the red men, our neighbors, become truly one people with us, enjoying all the rights and privileges we do, and living in peace and plenty as we do, without anyone to make them afraid, to injure their persons, or to take their property, without being punished for it according to fixed laws. Thomas Jefferson, 1808.
Jefferson's dream was slow to be realized as conflicts between the U.S. government and Native Americans set off a chain of events that dramatically reduced Native populations throughout the 19th century. Thomas Jefferson believed in the promise of America and had faith in the American people. But this faith would truly be tested nearly 60 years later, when the Republic came dangerously close to unraveling. The Civil War was the most tumultuous period in American history. The differences between the states had deeply divided a nation, pitting brother against brother on American soil. But it was the determination of one man to keep the United States united. Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. Abraham Lincoln was a self-made man of great character, a frontiersman who came from humble beginnings. When Lincoln was inaugurated in 1861, he faced more adversity than any other president in U.S. history. Many southern states had withdrawn from the Union. And even though Lincoln opposed war, he warned the South in his inaugural address that he would take whatever measures necessary to stop the rebellion.
In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one, to preserve, protect, and defend it. Abraham Lincoln, 1861.
The Civil War raged on for 4 brutal years. But Lincoln stuck to his commitment to democracy. His main objective was to save the Union, and he also strongly believed in freedom for all Americans. Until slavery was abolished, Lincoln felt the U.S. could never truly be the home of the free. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation began the process that ended the evils of slavery forever. Over 500,000 Union and Confederate soldiers lost their lives in the Civil War. But during his famous Gettysburg Address, Lincoln reminded the American people what this war was really all about.
That we here highly resolve that these dead should not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Abraham Lincoln, 1863.
Over the next 50 years, the United States would go through a dramatic transformation. The year 1900 was coming around the bend, and America was turning from a rural republic to a budding industrial power. It was clear that this new century, which burst with hope, needed a fresh start and a fresh approach. It was Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president, who led the way.
Is America a weakling? To shrink from the work of the great world powers? No! The young giant of the West stands on a continent and clasps the crest of an ocean in either hand. Our nation, glorious in youth and strength, looks into the future with eager eyes and rejoices as a strong man to run a race. Theodore Roosevelt, 1897.
He was energetic, he was robust, and he was eager to show the world that America was a force to be reckoned with. Theodore Roosevelt believed in the strenuous life. Frail and sickly as a young boy, he overcame his illnesses and grew up to be a naturalist, a cowboy, a war hero, an author, and President of the United States by the young age of 42. His vigorous outlook on life transferred to the Oval Office. Roosevelt was a man of action. He promoted economic freedom and was a friend to the working class, protecting their rights against big business and what he called the criminal rich. Roosevelt also expanded the country's power abroad. It was his support of the 1903 revolution in Panama that led the U.S. to acquire territory for the construction of the Panama Canal. This massive undertaking not only created a valuable link between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, but it put the United States on the map in world politics. Yet, Roosevelt may be known best for his passion for
the days of our children, the very prosperity which we ought by right to hand down to them, amplified and developed. Theodore Roosevelt, 1907.
The pursuit of the American dream did not end with Theodore Roosevelt's term. Instead, it has carried us into the 21st century. Throughout history, countless Americans have made great sacrifices so that we can enjoy the freedoms of this land.
The only thing we have to fear, I have a dream to ask not what your country can do for you.
The same freedoms guaranteed in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. The same freedoms millions of people have sought since the first immigrants arrived over 200 years ago. Gutzon Borglum reminds us of this with his timeless memorial. 4 Americans representing the birth, growth, preservation, and development of this country. All embodying the spirit of our nation. All advocates of freedom, dignity, and the ideals of American life.
Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of grace, for purple mountains of majesties, above the fruited plain.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and join in singing America's national anthem.
Oh, they can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed that the twilight's vast gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous skies o'er the ramparts we watched.
personnel, past and present, if you've served in our military, I would ask that you start working your way down to the stage. If you're not able to make it to the stage, I would ask if you could please send a representative, as we would like to recognize you as well. Again, if you've served in our military, past or present, I would like to invite you down to our stage. If you're interested in participating in flag retreat and flag holding, please meet me by the flagpole. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen that are up here, if you could go ahead and fall in behind one of the four gentlemen that are standing right up here. I'm actually going to have you guys raise your hands so they can see you. And if you could all just fall into one of the lines right behind them, please. Straighten out just a little bit, please. Now this part may have been a little while for some of you, but left, face. I'm going to come to each of you individually. If you could please say your rank, your name, and your branch of service. Again, if you could please just say your rank, your name, and your branch of service. First Lieutenant Sidney Wise, U.S. Air Force.
Special Force Class James Niles, U.S. Army.
Private First
Class LG Paul, U.S. Army.
Sergeant Ron Boyd, USMC.
Technical Sergeant Kaneen, United States Air Force.
Mike Radovic, U.S. Navy Seas.
Spec 5, Leland Wywick, U.S. Army.
Chief Master Sergeant Bob Kelchner, United States Air Force, retired.
Chief Ross Milling, U.S. Army.
Chief Petty Officer Jonathan Murray, U.S. Navy.
CW3 Leroy F. Rushmore, Army, retired.
John Vargas, Command Sergeant Major, retired.
Watch your step. If all of you could please take one step forward.
Austin Bruner, Airman, United States Air Force.
Erin Herrera, United States Air Force.
Chief Master Sergeant Hank Kapanek, U.S. Air Force, retired.
Bill Grady, U.S. Navy, third class petty officer.
John Miller, Second Lieutenant, United States Air Force.
Alan Everett, Private, U.S. Army.
William Driver, Spec 4, U.S. Army.
Sergeant Clark Driver, U.S. Army.
Joe Humphrey, AD2, U.S. Navy.
Paul Gross, Captain, United States Army.
First Lieutenant James Kelly, U.S. Air Force.
If all of you could please take one step forward.
Master Sergeant Scott Peck, United States Marine Corps, United States Air Force, United States Army.
Staff Sergeant Brian Baker, U.S. Air Force.
Sergeant Brian Ward, U.S. Air Force.
Spec 5 Glenn Zimmerman, U.S. Army.
Lieutenant Glenn Rules, U.S. Navy.
Lieutenant Colonel Walter Lazier, United States Air Force, retired.
Lieutenant Commander David Humansky, United States Navy.
Spec 4 Alan Morrison, U.S. Army.
Sergeant Michael Lyons, U.S. Air Force.
Lieutenant Colonel Earl Morton, United States Army. Josh Morton, United States Navy.
Airman First Class Milton Simmons, Air Force.
Airman First Class Michael Dwyer, Air Force.
Master Sergeant Melvin Baldwin, U.S. Air Force, retired.
If all of you could please take one step forward.
Senior Master Sergeant Wesley Cordis, U.S. Air Force, retired. Sergeant Bob Miller, U.S. Army.
Staff Sergeant Joseph Hamilton, U.S. Marines, U.S. Army.
Lieutenant Colonel Walter Roberts, United States Air Force.
Mark Dawson, Private First Class, U.S. Marines.
Gordon Cleveland, United States Air Force.
Specs 5 Tom Cadis, U.S. Army, Peace Corps Volunteer, Tanganyika 1.
First Lieutenant Arthur Young, Air Force, and Peace Corps Volunteer.
Lieutenant Colonel Kathleen Hughes, U.S. Army Nurse Corps.
Bill Thomas, Sergeant, U.S. Army. Spec 4 Alon Rivera, U.S. Army. Spec 5 Skip Standel, U.S. Army.
Roger Brendel, Navy. Tech Sergeant Roger Fagerland, U.S. Air Force.
Aaron Ware, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, Second Lieutenant, United States Air Force.
Thomas Heenan, Senior Master Sergeant, U.S. Air Force, retired.
Sergeant Brian Jones, United States Marine Corps. For all of you that are on this stage, and for those of you who couldn't make it, a lot of times we don't think it's much what we do while we serve. Many of us standing from the outside looking in realize the things that you've done. And we can't thank you enough for the sacrifices that you've given to our country. And I'd like to ask for one more round of applause, please. This does conclude our evening program, but before you leave, I'd like you to do one more thing for me. If you could please look to your right, look to your left, look in front of you. Please make sure that you have everything and everyone that belongs to you. Again, drive safe out there, it's very dark, and Baby wants to get home to see his mom. Thank you for coming to my question.